Please come on in if you would like to leave drinks outside.
And there is one more seat.
A warm welcome to Boxen and to the extraordinary Space Popular exhibition that has been gracing our new space for the past few weeks. We're so happy to see so many people here. My name's Kieran Long, I'm the director here at ArkDes, and what I see here is a mix of people interested in the project, of course, but also Fredrik and Lara and your amazing students who are here really animating the whole museum for this week. And you know, the people you see wandering around in headsets out there, blame these guys if they walk into you or headbutt you or something like that. But we're so pleased that Space Popular and Fredrik and Lara in particular have put so much into this installation. I always feel like it's worth saying this is a very low budget project, and what Fredrik and Lara have achieved, both in the technology, spatially, the graphics, the whole experience of being here in Boxen, I think is a fantastic thing for ArkDes, so we're really grateful. And it's also fun to be able to use the space for what it's intended for, to make it a place of discussion and debate, and that's what tonight's about. James Taylor-Foster, our curator of contemporary architecture and design, is going to chair the evening and will introduce you to all the participants and to the themes. But I should also extend a vote of thanks to him, who's also somebody who's pushing forward the more experimental part of what ArkDes is doing now. And what you see here is just the first in a series of exhibitions that we hope you'll all come back and experience. And there'll be many more events like this. But yeah, just to end again to thank Lara and Fredrik again for your amazing students again. And let James introduce.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to sit down because it's all about sitting down.
You can stand awkwardly.
We have this sit awkwardly. No, so this exhibition, most of you have probably seen it, maybe if this is your first time. This exhibition is talking about some of the big questions that connect to this idea of virtually augmented environments, of virtual worlds, predominantly how architecture and design relate to that, but also more importantly what tonight's about, looking at how citizenship will start to become an important question to engage with as we move into virtual environments. So that's the assumption that we're all here for. Now, the assumption is that in the next 10 to 20 years, we will all be citizens not just of physical worlds, but of virtually augmented physical worlds, of virtual worlds in themselves. And the kind of people that we have here tonight who are going to be leading some of these discussions, looking at three key areas: health and behavior, buildings and cities, and arts and institutions, are all extremely interesting. They have phenomenally wonderful things to say. The idea is they're going to sit on this wonderful bench. Some of them are going to present some things, but the idea is this is a conversation, and we're all part of this conversation. We're in this kind of quite beautiful little piazza tour designed here by Space Popular as part of the exhibition. This is what this is meant to be. So don't feel free to shout at people who are on the bench and argue with them, and just also feel free to be part of a broader discussion. But to begin, Fredrik and Lara are going to give a kind of rundown of what this exhibition is and expand a little bit on all the conversations that we had as we started to approach the creation of this show.
Yeah.
So, take the black bench, Fredrik.
Professional bench.
Okay, thank you so much,
Thank you,
James, and thank you, Kieran.
And welcome everyone here. So we will give a brief intro of what the exhibition is about, and there is plenty more information in the booklet which you should take with you if you haven't done so already. The core of the show is to question how are we going to value our virtual spaces? As architects, the main question we're working towards is how are we going to assign value to architecture in an environment, in a place in which none of the previously existing systems of value work anymore.
So in that sense, it's also really within the context of ArkDes and this new gallery, a kind of call to action for architects, designers, city planners to really start thinking about how is this going to happen and what are the values that we're bringing forward. Of course, considering the kind of values that we normally use to evaluate architecture, such as scale, location, materiality, these things that accumulate into often a financial value. In the virtual, those things don't apply anymore. Architecture can be any size, it can be made of anything, it can be anywhere. So many of the way we think about architecture changed fundamentally. So this is really kind of a call to action for us all to rethink this.
Yeah.
So if we say a little bit about the room we're in and the kind of how we've structured the exhibition and the things that we see around us. So we're actually sitting right now on a big carpet, which is the key to the whole exhibition. And in a sense, this is both a carpet, but it's also a diagram. So we have selected 6 very iconic locations from Stockholm that all carry very strong narrative and very strong values in their physical abilities and physical qualities. And the closer they get to the center, where Amy is sitting here on this bench, the closer we get to the center, the more they get transformed in the virtual. So these environments we see around us here, we see Östermalmstorg's sandblasted concrete walls by Siri Derkit, a political public artwork from the 60s. We have the Golden Hall by Einar Forseth in the City Hall of Stockholm, and we have the facade of Stureplan behind us. So they're all very close to the center, which means that they are going through a lot of transformation. You see the space behind us over here is actually the way it's there in reality, more or less, at least visually. And the closer we get to as a center, the more it gets overlaid with the virtual.
And then each of these environments has a different theme, which asks a different question. For example, behind us, Siri Decker's murals that were all about feminism, like a few decades ago, then question the fact that, well, if we have this media wall that she created, right, with messages, with information, and if we can change those messages by the second, because they are virtual, then what topics would we be debating? So towards the end, you see perhaps more up-to-date issues of gender, issues of the virtual, and so on. And the Golden Hall, a place that celebrates the national heroes, that celebrates the history of Sweden and so on, is now celebrating elements or achievements that are highly contemporary, like some of you might recognize iconic Candy Crush elements or Wikipedia or the Wi-Fi as some of the achievements that perhaps we could be celebrating if these things were updated by the minute. And behind you in Stureplan, it has been transformed from the very high-end shopping area into a virtual marketplace where anyone can buy, but also anyone can sell. So the whole point with raising these questions in environments that are very familiar to those of you from Stockholm is the whole point is to actually begin early enough so that virtual worlds are thought through, and the way to use virtual worlds, the way to exist in virtual worlds, identity, value, property, all of these things that we're going to have to invent, that we're going to have to create as a society very soon, and we're already in the process of doing so, that as many of us as possible engage in this, so we don't run into issues later on, basically.
And the last thing we'll say, as Lara said, the booklet contains a lot more information and text from James and William Hamilton and from us. Also includes 10 propositions, sort of our speculations of what architecture in the virtual might be and how it might change. And in this bench that is in the center of the space is also a cord coming out with a link into a virtual version of the show we're sitting in, which we invite you all to look at afterwards, where you can see a sort of full version of the space we're in, because these are all flattened into millimeter thin fabrics. It's also a space that anyone from all around the world can join. It's what's called a social VR platform. So basically you create an account and you can come here and meet the people that are gathering here, of which one would be the person that's actually in this room. Yeah, and with that, we'd like to just hand over to James again to introduce the rest of the guests, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand over straight to William and Amy,
Yeah, and we let them.
who I'm going to ask to introduce yourselves, because there's too much to say. But yeah. Go ahead,
Whose
Amy.
slides are going first? Or?
It's up to you.
Oh, which slides?
What's next?
Well, yours is a video that we can go to at any point. So.
Oh, yeah.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you to Lara and Fredrik for putting on this amazing show, and to James and Karen and the rest of ArkDes. My name is William Hamilton, and my passion is psychological science. So I came into VR in 2014. basically as a coming at this technology as a solution to a big problem that is in psychology, namely the quality of research that's going on. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but in psychology, like studying humans is really, really hard. And unlike physics, we don't even have like a beginning of a unified theory of what the mind is, or what motivates a person, or what personality is. All of these things is like far away from being discoverable by psychological science. And I got into VR partly because it's a extremely interesting quest in this technology of measuring human beings. Measuring human beings is also what you do as a psychological scientist. So I was fascinated with VR and this technology's quest of measuring a human, because only by measuring a human will you be able to present a convincing virtual environment. Like the virtual world is basically a reverse of what the human is doing. So like if the human is looking to the left, then the environment needs to rotate to accommodate this movement. Studying movements, I mean eye movements, physical movements through the room, movements of your hands, your fingers, all kinds of human behavior is really the quest of engineers in VR. And who knew then that psychology is the physics of VR? So I really came to understand that when creating virtual reality experiences, you don't have to have any envy of physics anymore, because basically psychology and our understanding of cognition, of perception is what creates the framework of this world and of this experience. And I also began to think a lot about B.F. Skinner, father of behaviorism, and his experiments on rats, and the type of research that virtual reality. So virtual reality, like my definition, is something that simulates or creates the perception of being somewhere else than you are now. So a technology that can create presence. And creating presence in an artificial environment enables modifying anything inside of this environment to your own specification or demand, enabling these interesting experiments that I started working with at my university, Stockholm University. I was working studying human perception of fear, actually using VR. And other people are also incredibly interested in VR right now. Like that's why I really think that this exhibition is extremely timely. We're at this technological shift right now where we have technological paradigms that all are operating on psychological principles, and the people that are creating these technologies that basically run our lives right now all view virtual reality as the next frontier of media and of humans' relationship to technology. And after thinking about this, I was also studying to become a clinical psychologist, so was really becoming aware of how bad the services for people who have mental illness. So if you have mental illness today, you most likely don't get any treatment at all. So I made it my mission to try to use VR, like to appropriate VR technology, not to run Skinner-style behavior modification experiments or paradigms, but to create a technology that can do good in this world. And I've been doing this for 5 years, so running a lot of different trials, creating basically the next generation of self-help apps for mental health. So it's all of the power that comes with VR can be used, to affect human beings, and I try to use this technology to affect human beings in a good way. So created a company called Mimerse that collaborates with clinicians, with researchers, with hospitals, with care providers, and we develop many different types of applications. So the most typical way that we use VR is to create a simulation where someone can exercise on something that's really hard to exercise. So could be anything from flying on a plane, which some people have huge issues with, or practicing not freaking out when you see a spider, to public speaking. We're creating relaxation environments and stuff like this. So yeah, that's like a short introduction to me and my background. Yeah, handing over to Amy.
I think I need it.
Currently on display at Techniska, no?
Yeah,
Is
so
important to mention.
yes, so I worked with this exhibition with Lara and Fredrik mostly on like the theoretical side, and been lucky enough to have like permanent exhibition at Techniska. One of our apps is out there as well, and I'm super excited about VR, and hopefully we can get a nice conversation going later. But is it clear to everyone? Like for me, VR is a technology that's going to transform architecture, but I really believe that the biggest positive potential for VR is in the area of mental health. People always forget mental health. Like if you go to KTH or engineering students, they rarely, like, everything is about using technology to solve problems, and usually you forget the problem of mental health. But the problem of mental health really is humanity's biggest right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, so my name's Amy. I'm a visual artist based in London. I'm really thrilled to be invited by everyone here to join. I actually don't work in VR, but I'm going to tell you about a project that I'm working on the last year that's looking at the relationship between daydream and architecture. And by daydream, I am talking about actual real daydream that we all do every day, not the Google daydream. Although I did think maybe if you want to think about VR when I say daydream, it could be quite interesting. We could see, yeah.
It's
I mean,
another
daydream is potentially the first virtual reality that we know. So I came to this project, or I came to this interest with looking at through the lens of neuroscience. So within neuroscience, since the 1990s, there's been a great interest in what's happening in our brains when we're resting. They realized, or they found and discovered this area of the brain called the default mode network, and found that that area of the brain was just as active when we're in a restful state as it is when we are engaged in the outside world. And that has lots of ramifications that I was interested in, of the concept of productivity, for one. In parallel to that, I also was sort of becoming aware of architects' growing interest in looking at neuroscience and applying the kind of data and information that was coming out of neuroscience to architectural design. And basically just sort of wondered, wow, what could happen now if you take data about daydream and apply it to architecture? Could you create spaces that harness a daydream state, that click you into it immediately, or that stop it immediately? I mean, that's the basic kind of beginning of it. As I continued in the research, I became most interested in investigations that look at the embodiment of daydream. So there was a lot of focus on kind of fMRI scans and EEG scans, which simply, to me, seem to cut off the brain from the body, the brain from the environment, and culture and society in general. So I started really focusing in on projects that looked at this embodiment. So the questions I was kind of asked, sorry, they were playing already. The questions I was asking was kind of what is the body doing when the mind wanders? Could the body lead the mind into daydreaming? And if we are able to track kind of with behavioural sensing, if we move into daydream states, can we make environments that are responsive to it? And what would they be like, or how would that work? So I tackled these sort of quite big, broad questions by setting up 3 scenarios, and I filmed those scenarios. So this is the first scenario that you can see here, and that was actually working with so it wasn't just neuroscience I was looking at in the end. I also started working with theatre people, dance, this kind of sides as well, and this was actually a movement director called Gabriella Moletto, and she led a movement workshop with a group of students who were actually asked for a whole day to improvise daydream. So she was leading them into methods of improvising a daydream state. And I was interested in kind of this idea of performing absence. So the notion of being an actor and being on stage is that you really have a great presence in, and people listen to you because you have this presence. But actually when you're daydreaming, you're performing an absence. And I just loved that idea of how do you do that. On the flip side, in the film work, I was then interested in if you could kind of, through the sort of the filming of those actions and watching those actions played back, if you could create a kind of kinesthetic memory in the viewer. So the viewer sees someone moving in a certain way and it can trigger a memory of your own body's movements and potentially lead you into daydream. I mean, that's a bit of a leap. Maybe you know about that. I don't know. But I just liked it as a kind of poetics as well. So that was the first scenario. And then the second scenario, which I sort of prepared a short clip for. This is the first time I'm showing any of this video footage actually, so it's quite exciting. The second scenario was an experiment that I kind of, as an artist you can create these experiments that you kind of draw from different things. So I drew together, so it started with a paper written by Paul Selly, who's a neuroscientist based in the US, and he was looking at the relationship between fidgeting and daydream. And his general idea was that as your mind loses focus and sort of control, so does your body. So we all know the scenario when you're in a lecture and you're kind of drifting off and you're fiddling with your pen or something. Like that would be that scenario. And he made this last comment in this paper that was that we shouldn't just ignore those fidgets, or we shouldn't overlook the fidgets themselves. Like potentially the fidgets are an embodiment of where the mind is wandering. So I was then interested, if you really focused on those fidgets, what could we learn about human behaviour that they become this sort of vision of a daydream. So what I did was set up this experiment scenario where we had a leap motion, which is like is it from the Xbox? I don't know. Like a hand tracking device underneath the hand of, you can see how to demonstrate, daydreamers. And the two kind of big problems I had was how do you bring someone into a daydream state for a very set period of time, and how do you then know at what point during that time they actually daydreamed or not? And obviously there's brain scientists that have been also studying daydream and been getting over this problem, or trying to get over this problem, and it's very contested and interesting. But I drew from, so the first problem was how to get people into daydream states. So I created a room scenario that was based on an experiment from 1924. There was actually by a guy called John Morgan, and he was trying to look at how to test suggestibility, so kind of how open and suggestible people were to an environment, which I think is also quite interesting in a VR sort of, or in any kind of design sort of experiment. And so it was basically a dark room with crystal light moving around, and then to actually pinpoint these daydream moments, we had a random beep, and at that random beep, the person was asked, and if the audio was working, you would have heard it. The person was asked at the moment of the beep, I can't remember it now. What was your mind? Not what was your mind doing? It's really eloquent. I can't remember how it goes though. But like, what was the contents of your inner thoughts? That's it. What was the contents of your inner thoughts? And then you have to speak. And so the idea is you're kind of cutting into time and you're getting this kind of pristine moment. It's called a descriptive experience sampling technique. And it turns out you have to be quite trained in it. I'll put that. it didn't quite get the results that I was looking for. But I was also interested in just playing out these scenarios. It's kind of how is science framing the body as well. But kind of another discussion. So that all coming together, I'm going to wind it up, is that the third scenario is then bringing those video pieces into and this is what I'm working on now, is bringing these into a 3D environment where we're actually using eye trackers to trace if people move into a daydream state while they're watching my artwork, and to break those daydream states. So you can base it on eye tracking. It's mainly about pupil dilation, fixation, where the eyes fixate, or not where, but how long, and blinking. And using those kind of signifiers, I want to try to sort of use people's daydream states kind of as an editing tool. You could see it. Instead of me editing, the daydreams editing, something along those lines. And that's going to be in Unity, which I'm struggling with. So if anyone's a Unity programmer, that's it. Couldn't help. But
question of, like, I think one of the most interesting statements that Fredrik and Lara made based on this exhibition was this question of architecture has been peripheral for such a long time, right? Is that architecture has been designed to be sort of accommodated by, you know, a door is a certain size so we can walk under it and not have to bump our heads, and it's this question of human perception becoming, which both of you I think are really engaged with, the role of human perception in virtual environments completely almost subverts this question of what architecture is there to do. No? Go.
in that by measuring those perceptions, the architecture can fit around the person. Is this what you mean?
Exactly. Or even on a more simplistic level, the architecture becomes suddenly more valuable in a virtual environment.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
But also,
Sorry.
but also the peripheral meaning in the background.
Yeah.
We do things in architecture. We don't do architecture all the time. Right? It's something that we do very rarely, and then we do things in architecture. But in the virtual, architecture can become the thing we do. We create spaces as we need them, or we create furniture arrangements or new facades as we want them, or as we desire them, or as we might need them indeed to find a path for the mind in a specific moment. That's the program, the app that you've been working on, where you use architecture to create a certain state of mind.
For sure. I mean, so prior to working on this show, I hadn't thought that much about architecture and what architecture is. Like for me, starting out, I thought architecture mostly is like the design of a building, but architecture could be defined as much more than just the design of a specific building. I think VR is definitely going to change, like fundamentally how you think about aesthetics, how you think about buildings. Like for me, the first thing that came up is this dystopian vision of a city that's only QR codes, or only shapes that's optimized to enable projecting virtual surfaces on these surfaces, and just removing the headset. This is going to be like empty placeholder, like fences, because you still need some stuff in the real world to like keep people outside of areas where you keep valuable stuff, things like this. But then the rest is going to become virtual probably. And what we see now in technology is that everyone's virtual experience, like Facebook to me is virtual, and everyone's experience on Facebook is different. And no one knows why you have this specific experience on Facebook. Like it's, imagine a city like this, like a city in the metaphor of like a Facebook feed is going to be this such a new, interesting, strange paradigm that you can hardly like even begin to think about it. Which I think is like the starting point for this exhibition as well. It's like really, I mean, as Fredrik was saying, it's like. So much in architecture has been about function and like compromising between limitations of material cost, stuff like this. Like, why can't you make a building in gold? Like, why can't you make the most intricate, beautiful building for everyone? It's you know, this scarcity that you don't have in virtual environments. What we're working on is, like, I try to create virtual environments that induce people in different states, like maybe making them feel as relaxed as possible, or in some cases making them feel, you know, moderately scared, for instance, if you're doing exposure treatment. And I think providing the technology companies the keys to use this technology to just modify human beings' behavior and feelings, not only about like what's going on in their phone, but what's going on everywhere around them is this huge step that you really have to, you know.
I mean, that's why we are so interested in your work because you're basically saying that architecture is there in the virtual. The only purpose for architecture is to create a human experience, is to feed the mind. It does nothing else, because it doesn't need to shelter us. It doesn't need to create barriers for safety. So if it's not shelter, physical shelter, then what is it, right? And then we are now, as architects, trained to provide physical shelters.
Yeah.
We are trained in structures, we are trained in safety measures, we are trained in construction and so on.
Yeah.
We are not necessarily trained in psychology, we are not necessarily trained in neuroscience at all, even just basic notions. We have basic notions of engineering, but perhaps we need to start acquiring basic notions of other things so we can design spaces in the virtual and in the physical, which we do at the moment.
Are there any archetype cognitive scientists in the audience? Proof of point there.
Maybe a new niche.
It's a new niche.
My concern with like the ways that cognitive neuroscience and architecture are sort of working together at the moment, like there doesn't appear to be very much criticality towards where that research is coming from and how it should be applied. Like I've been following, maybe I shouldn't name it, but a conference in London, and they're basically talking about having these conscious cities, and there's just a repetition of this kind of, we're going to have a better city. It'll be more, I mean, a lot of it fits around wayfinding. That seems to be the most common sort of application for, the kind of brains and the taxi drivers and all of that. But, you know, it's basically the question, like, better for who? And, like, who's actually controlling, or not who's controlling, but, like, where are we going to get to, you know, if it's not controlled, or it can't be controlled, I know that, but...
Just to tie into something that you were saying, I mean, speaking about like my point of being to successfully create a good VR experience, you need to track human beings as good as possible. And this obviously includes eye tracking, obviously includes tracking your hands. Soon we're going to be able to measure things like daydreaming that is today really hard to measure, like your phone doesn't know if you're daydreaming or not. But it sounds, when you speak, like it's not that far off, but your VR headset is probably going to be aware when you daydream. And then, you know, it's not that much of a leap of like creating daydreaming, like that the environment that you're in, if you're inside of a virtual environment, this environment then starts adapting to the fact that you're daydreaming. And maybe in the, like speaking about like missing and critical discussion around this is like who then gets to decide what happens when you're daydreaming inside of this environment. Like it's definitely not going, hopefully it's going to be you, but probably not going to be you, because you know if you look at like public space today, it's more or less for sale in a lot of places and countries, you know. So in virtual space today, it's like hyper commercialistic and capitalistic. So
well, and it also comes up the issue of that if you're going to design based on cognition, based on experience, then you need to take a basic level where you measure everyone as equal. So there is a kind of universal understanding of how we are going to be affected and perceived, which people in our humanist society doesn't like so much. Right? To think that we all perceive, we are all kind of getting the same story, even if we think we have our very own perception.
I think on that note, we'll move on to our next guests, who are toward instrument. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves as well, because I think it's slightly more interesting. And Elena Malakavka. Is Elena... Where is Elena? She's coming. Oh. Dramatic entry. Feel free to take the bench. Yeah.
Do you have any presentation?
I have 2 images.
Okay.
Do you have any?
I think I have, but let's see how it's going, because I have more questions than answers for you guys. Yeah. You want to start?
I don't know, who's starting?
Maybe I can start with a very short intro
Yeah, that'd be
presentation.
great.
Can you give me, do you have HDMI?
No, just VGA.
Oh, okay, no presentation. Today. So, hi everyone. First of all, let's a bit warm up because it feels like you've become a bit like virtual here. My name is Elena. I'm a researcher at KTH, and I do my PhD in the area of big data and smart buildings. But then I found that, okay, I have my lab, I have physical building, and I have so many things which I cannot do physically. And as a researcher, as a curious mind, you always try to find, okay, but how I can do things. And that's where the first question I got, and that question brought me to VR, how we can expand physical world using technologies we have today. And actually, you cannot imagine when you go deeper to this question, what is physical world? Why it's limit us? Why it's really stop us? Because our creativity is so broad, right? And physical world is kind of this stop line which tell us, okay, no, but this is enough space, this is enough this is enough this. And I start to explore, okay, but how I can expand physical reality using first digital reality and then virtual reality. For example, this is a beautiful Stureplan piece. How many of you want to live in Stureplan? Probably it's a lot of people who want to live in Stureplan. How many actually can? Few, right? What means that physical world always bring us these limits. But this new media can give us some opportunity to actually bring what we cannot have physically. For example, we talk about architecture. And I have a lot of architectures which I love, but they are never did their projects physically because they're too ambitious. For example, my favorite project from Fredrik, who designed this knowledge belt or fun palace, it's too ambitious to be physical. If you come, or for example, project from UCSLA, how we can build the whole city as a big organic organism. I think no one can grant such project because it's too ambitious. And normally we have too big ambitions to physical world. And that's how, for me, this media happened, because we have too many ideas to work with, to experience. We have a desire to do it. And that's, for me, how VR paradoxically happened, as a space to bring our ideas. To bring our ideas not as a just archive, but as an experiential platform. Case from Boston. They said, okay, there are so many great projects which we cannot build physically yet. Let's try them virtually, city-wise, real estate platform. Bring your idea, bring people virtually, test things, and see how it's work. It's called Decentraland. The whole world, the whole city of Boston, virtually as a space for ideas. And you can actually experience and measure things, how people like it and don't like it and so on. What I mean that virtual reality is a great tool of expansions. Of course, as a researcher, I need to be responsible for our tracks we design. And a lot of people ask me, oh, Elena, what about matrix scenario? What if we start to feel bad or don't want to go back to this gray, rainy world? I said, come on. First of all, we need to explore how this dynamic happened. That's one. Second, as researchers and as designers and developers, of course, we understand responsibility of designing such worlds. And third, it's about also explore some what's called artificial senses. How we can actually understand who we are in this fully physical, virtual, simulated world. In science, we have what's called semi-science, or some philosophical dimensions which are not approved scientifically, but they still exist. For example, Hugo Everett in the 70s was explored multiverse as a term. Multiverse is a philosophical school which explored that we have several realities at the same moment. And everyone said, this guy is idiot, because we don't have, it's only one reality. Look, it's only one batch, only one screen. But then answer me, if this guy is idiot, why guys in CERN try physically prove that particle exists in two places at the same moment? What actually multiverse? What means that VR take it as a provocation for a lot of questions, a lot of explorations, a lot of research, a lot of new doors to another doors to another doors to another doors. It's not something what can give you answers or be functional. For me, it's a new canvas for our imagination, for our creativity, and for expansion of physical world, which is full of limitations.
Thank you. I have a question.
Yes.
You say that, what did you say? You said that reality puts limits and that is frustrating for our imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we know it's not the other way around? That it's our imagination that is limited and reality that is frustrated with us?
Of course, it could be both ways, but we explored a lot, let's call it, like, if we take, let's give a simple example. When you come to airport, there is this red line which kind of create the quite slow process of coming you to the check-in, right? It's by design. It's physical functional option which slow down your process of not creating a crowd. Brain creates ideas faster than we can build it physically. And that's the biggest difference between physical and creative world. Because physical world take time. Physical world is iterative. That's one thing. Another thing is that when we try to also it's more from the artificial intelligence, like a scientific track. When researchers try to measure the speed of processing particular like task, why machine is doing faster? Because it doesn't have physical limitations which we have in our body. Electromagnetical like processing happening faster because it's just electron-based process rather than physical in our neuro world. What means that it's by design, biology, physiology, physical by design make things a bit slower.
But I was thinking that that's built environment. Maybe of all stupid constructions that exist, perhaps the airport is the most stupid construction in terms of frustrating you.
Okay.
But if you think like you're lying if we talk about reality, if I'm lying on a beach and it's I look up and I see the Milky Way, can I imagine something even more complex and vast than the universe? You mean that there is so that the human brain is like bigger than the universe?
But let's divide human-made worlds and nature-made worlds.
Okay.
Of course, if we talk about nature-made world, there's a lot of spaces
so
to use.
Built, really.
I'm talking more about designing by human as a world. So of course, if you go to forests, you can spend hours and see so many different things. But if you come to the concrete box, which call room, probably it's a bit less. And it's a lot of things which you need to use your imagination as a engine to create what it could be. And again, what is interesting with virtual reality that you can tell, but then we have art, we have music, we have so many forms of imagination expression, right? But never we had such media which activate so many parts of our brain and actually create experiential practice. Of course, we have participatory art that's close to this. We have theater. For me, the closest piece of art to VR is theater, where we have many enough things and actions for your brain to process. I never studied neuroscience before I started to use VR in my research. It's supposed to be construction architecture oriented project at KTH Living Lab, where we actually have building with 300 apartments and 300 students living there, and my task was explore their data and functionality of the building and bridge it. But then I found that I cannot this and this and this and this and this, and I want to build this virtual twin of my lab and do so many things. But then it started to be explosion of ideas what could be done there. So it could be a box for creativity. It could be a box which can bring you to something else. That's only one reason why I always motivate people to start to think about VR, because it can bring you to so many tracks and questions interesting to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, do we have any?
There's a little
click somehow.
Still
I
physical.
only have.
Not your mind.
I'm so old that I prepared a paper, and otherwise, and we have a strict timeline here as well. So, architecture.
What is the time?
We see a room without windows. There is a fold-up table in the corner with a gramophone player on top. A tent-like bed balancing on 4 cones. 2 folding chairs. One is folded up, hanging on the wall. The other is standing. The walls seems to be made out of paper, same as the floor. There is a wall-mounted unit with 3 glass shelves holding containers with what seems like spices, sugar, salt, but also crayons and matchboxes. In 1926, Hannes Meyer creates a set for a room in order to make a photograph with the title Co-op Interior. The photograph had the caption Die Wohnung, also the apartment, and it was published in the journal Das Werk, accompanying Meyer's article Die Neue Welt, the New World. And here is an excerpt from that essay. The steadily increasing perfection attained in printing, photographic and cinematographic processes enables the real world to be reproduced with an ever greater degree of accuracy. The picture the landscape presents to the eye today is much more diverse than ever before. Hangars and powerhouses are the cathedrals of the spirit of the age. this picture has the power to influence through the specific shape, colors and lights of its modern elements. The wireless aerials, the dams, the lattice girders, through the parabola of the airship, the triangle of the traffic sign, the circle of the railway signal, the rectangle of the billboard, through the linear element of transmission lines, telephone wires, overhead tram wires, high tension cables, through radio towers, concrete posts, flashing lights, and filling stations. We see a room without windows. There are 4 felt-like columns continuing outside of the frame. Behind them there are walls making up a corner. On the walls are images and texts. Logos seem to hang suspended in the air. A series of yellow neon skull and crossbones seems to descend from above. In the foreground there is a dark grey floor. On it we see 8 individuals. To the right someone is riding a bull drinking something red from a glass with straws. Next to it we see a much smaller person riding a small cow. There is a text in the bright orange hair. Behind there is an individual with what seems like the tail of a wolf. In the left corner we see roses. This is a snapshot from the studio space used by architecture students in 2006. So after using game engines to make architecture and to discuss the relationship between tools, design methods and the production of space, the studio I was running at KTH in between 2003 and 2017. In 2005 we moved onto the platform Second Life. For 2 years we operated here the office, which was an island in Second Life that worked as a testbed for architecture projects and as a place for collaborations with other universities, interests groups and cultural institutions, and some of the logos and names you can see on there. To us, it was clear from the start that even though the representation of space was linked to our analog world, architecture as we knew it had very little significance on these platforms. The separation between space, objects and subjects was mostly blurred. Instead of construction, we worked a lot on scripting, making things change and making things move. It was a very social and political and personal space. Instead of programming space, we programmed activities. We programmed relations and meetings. Space became a backdrop for events that was simultaneously analog and digital. And here we were thinking of that it was less about space and more about time. So here, like time, this is a quote by a philosopher called Deleuze. Time is not the interior in us, but just the opposite, the interiority in which we are, in which we move, we live and change. So back here to Hannes Meyer. So after being suspended as the head of the Bauhaus School by the mayor of Dessau in 1930, he moved to the Soviet Union. Here he writes a text called The 13 Principles on Marxist Architecture. And I will now quote number 8 and 9. The building system of the socialist town is elastic, not rigid. The greater the elasticity of such centers of industry, housing, education and recreation, the greater is the practical effect on the continuous process of socializing the life of the masses. The artistic mission of proletarian architecture is to produce certain architectural solutions which lend themselves to the most varied manifestations of proletarian art. Mass cinema, mass demonstration, mass theater, and mass sport. The building itself is not a work of art. Its size is determined by the dimensions and functions of its program, and not by the shallow pathos of any trimmings. So these principles now applied on the whole society, that was, we could see, this text was from 1930, and that was already present in this code of interior from 1926. So Hannes Meyer describes the idea of a room here in the previous picture. Space as a kind of an infrastructure for complexities of a new world order, as he says, forming new relationships between humans and architecture. Towards the end of the text, this Die Neue Welt, the new world, he talks about how the 9 Greek muses of the arts and science, and that is, this is Greek, and Greek history, maybe Daniel can help us out later, but epic poetry, history, love poetry, music, tragedy, sacred poetry, dance, comedy, and astronomy. So, they have stepped down in the world of Hannes Meyer into the life from their high pedestals. And he says, continuing here, their fields have been expropriated, confused and blurred. The boundaries between painting, mathematics and music can no longer be defined, and between sound and color there is only the gradual difference of oscillatory frequency. The depreciation of all works of art is indisputable, and there can be no question that the continued utilization of new and exact knowledge in their place is merely a matter of time. The art of felt imitation is in the process of being dismantled. Art is becoming invention and controlled reality. So, question here in the end then, are we now finally the citizens of this new world of Hannes Meyer, or are we are we citizens, as you say, of virtual worlds?
Good question.
Exactly.
I just, as a point of note, I find it very interesting how even when we're talking about architecture, it's impossible almost to not think about architecture as almost scenography, as some kind of performance, like as a crucially performative act. I think both of you in some way actually talked about the theatre drama, this idea of the engagement, because ultimately, in these contexts, we are faced by the fact that the role of the individual, the role of the user, becomes even more integral, if it's possible to say, than in physical environments.
I can comment one thing, because I mean everyone tried VR, right? Everyone. And I think that you need to notice that you are in the center of content.
Oh.
It's not like Sam and you, it's not like movie and you. What I really respect this tool for is for democratization. Who is this guy who designed everything for us? Worldwide, architecture-wide, house-wide, movie-wide. Why we always consume someone's creation? Constantly. We constantly consume, they build this house for us, they build this like station for us, they build this movie for us. We always just passively consume someone's creation, right? In our lifespan. And in VR, you place in the city, that's why it's discussion about storytelling, because actually now you're in the world, and you're surrounded by the world, and you actually have tools to interact with this world, and even change it, stop it. You can move in this world how you want. We actually bring the tool which places you in the center of someone's universe, and this universe should build a dialogue with you, because you are central point of this. You're not anymore like in front of the stage. And you cannot imagine how much it will transform our perception of how it should be. And the fact that actually I did a big analysis of like cinema worlds, because we actually sit down and watch what's going on the screen, right? In VR, no, you can walk, you can even stop to watch, you can just do something there on the floor. They not control your attention anymore. They not have a storyline which you need to follow. Oh, now it's like this story, hero of the story. Now you design where to watch, where to go, what to do. And they have to give you tools to keep you in their like creation world. And I think it will be less and less their creation and more your interaction. And for me, it's a real shift of the paradigm around the democratization of art, architecture, and everything what's called creation. Because now it's not anymore someone's opinion, someone's vision, someone's world perception. Now you're in the center of this, and you need to do something with this.
But this is interesting because something we discovered, and like back in, this was like 2005 to 2007, and that was just the breakthrough of all social media. Like, so it was a time, it was before Facebook, before YouTube, before Twitter, and Second Life was this idea of a platform with a series of tools where the whole world was built by its residents. Yeah. This built by its residents. So that was an idea, and where you could monetize things on here. So that you could, if I build script or build an object, a virtual object, I can sell it to you for Linden dollars then, that you could transform into real money. I think I haven't been on Second Life for maybe 8 years, so I don't know.
High fidelity.
I don't know what it is, what's happening now. But what we saw, that the interest of people was that it was since it was made by residents and there was zero control, there was like lots and lots of gambling, lots and lots of pornography, like in like role-based or role-play based pornography, but lots of these kind of activities, and they were the big attractors for both money but also a lot of attention and people. So there was this really seeking out social engagements, or if you want, like social relationships.
Of course, we meet some on of course, but we need to meet this.
But I think what you're saying, so what I want to come to is that that it just provided tools which provided something that a lot of people, for instance at KTH at the time, were really concerned about, that they were running. We were one of the first universities on Second Life, and we were running on a platform that was sort of, did a lot of illegal gambling and quite shady pornography, for instance, and so on. So, and we also collaborated with the pirate cinema, and we got in lots of troubles with the lawyers at KTH and so on. So it was really sort of pushing the boundaries. But at the same time, it was really these kind of tools where it was possible to do all this. And what happened afterwards was that social networks or social media became on platforms, as you say. I mean, Second Life is of course also a platform, but it was a very soft platform. Facebook is an extremely hard platform. There's a lot of things you can't do, like lots and lots of things are impossible, and other things are possible, of course. But it's when you have a toolbox is very different from a platform.
Yeah.
I guess that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
So and unfortunately, I think that the social internet didn't take this. You talk about democracy or this role towards freedom, but it became rather that we are again sort of passive consumers on platforms.
Yeah. Maybe we can bring some questions from the audience and build some discussion.
I have a question with regards to the fact that there is this assumption that anything that is built in virtual reality has to be interactive, or there has to be. Which my point is that when we address that as architects, then we find us in this like, well, architecture is never the protagonist. It's always the thing that surrounds you in order to do something else. And I found that in the beginning of your paper, you were describing how with your students, you ended up designing a lot more the interactions rather than the architecture. And you were also eventually talking about the fact that it's all about the interaction. And my question is perhaps like, will there be room for practicing architecture as we know it in this like backdrop?
I can even give you a strong example. This summer I was in the Venice Architecture Biennale, and there were a couple of cases exactly about meditative observation and reflection where you cannot interact. Idea that we have options, more options than we have in physical world, but you still have from 0 to 100 interactivity. And today it's also about explore, okay, what I can do in a meditative, explorative, like liquid interfaces of virtual reality. Of course, it could be also very interactive and like another story, but what you're talking about, I can really just tell you that it's a big trend today in the VR design, especially in architecture, to bring this meditative observation of this media itself without interaction. I think we'll pass this phase of exploring this interaction is a big option. It's a new option. As a kid, you know, we're in the sandbox now of VR world. Or we play with small things. Oh, this is a cube, let's play. Oh, but this is something else. But no, we're observing things which we never observed before. We just play with this technology. And of course, like, for example, we discussed with you, when Stanford made a research that after VR, people feel more depression, and that everyone started to design collaborative VR. We will react on different things. We will react on our reaction of this media. And that's normal. That's what I call development. And that's why it could be both. It could be very interactive, highly interactive, or it could be just meditation of observing this media itself.
Just to add to that as well, I was thinking as you were talking that, and you've sort of shown in these two examples, like that the ICVR itself as a medium, in the same way paint is a medium and film is a medium. And I think sometimes somehow that is already authoring what you're experiencing, whether you're actually interacting with it or not. So the meditation is working because I'm guessing the cameras aren't moving that much, or you're pretty static, everything's been out of focus.
But I think that's a big difference between cases where you use camera to predefine the storyline, and cases where you just purely design space to be there. For example,
but you're still designing a vision, aren't you?
No.
But you create the graphics you're seeing.
Yeah.
Like you make a choice as the person who's
That's
created
true.
that. You could make it all blurry, and the person wearing the headset, it's completely blurry.
Let me give you an example. Immersive theater.
Yeah.
The main idea of immersive theater that they have a big space where story happening, and it's up to you where you will go, in which room, and that's how your story will function. It's kind of fast. Of course, it's a predefined building, but it's enough space for you to define your storyline.
Yeah.
It's more about multi-storyline approach, a parallax approach in storytelling way. It's not like my camera line which you need to follow, and some space to watch around. It's about give you enough space to even escape storyline, or be with your storyline, or be with your storyline. It's about giving you options and making you be in a position that you make decision of what I want. Maybe I'm introvert and I want to sit and do nothing in this VR. Or maybe I'm extrovert, I want to do every single possible game, so quizzes, quests, and so on. It's more about to expand the opportunities what we can do. Because if you sit, of course you can be in an empty room and use imagination and also travel in the, but we're trying to define this kind of how we can really bring more options for people to explore through activities, who they are, what they are, and stuff like this.
But I suppose I'm just trying to question like this thing of it not being authored. Like even if you're free to go wherever you want, like that's still been authored by.
Yeah, but let's call
like
it
the
from
vision
this
has been defined
come
in
to
a certain
this,
degree.
and then we will come to this.
Yeah.
It's more about from very restricted framework of what is like. If you look at film, it's a very well defined story which you cannot escape. You just can follow, right? How they move the cameras. In VR, you have more space, and I think we will expand this potential for having more space for people do something else. Yeah.
I think at this point, which as we talk about, especially authorship, let's bring Daniel. Let's actually exchange seats. Bring Daniel into the discussion because I think this discussion is super interesting, and I think you maybe have something to say about it. We'll see. I'm going to join you on the bench.
You don't have any images, right? Yes,
Yeah. Got cramp on my leg. Do you want to introduce?
Yes, so I am the neighbor. I'm the director of the museum next to this museum, and the Moderna Museet, which is an art museum. And I've been doing this for almost, it's almost 9 years ago that they asked me to take over here.
And your legal limit for running a museum is coming to an end.
That's true, but I end a little bit earlier because I'm doing something a little bit surprising. That's probably why I'm here.
It's exactly why you're here.
I mean, surprising to whom? I mean, a little bit surprising to me, maybe. But I've been, I'm even older than Tora, I think. So I've been, lucky, or also a little bit. I don't know. I've been a director of institutions now for so long that the bigger the institution, the further away you come from. You tend to be from art and artists. I've tried hard to be a writer and to be close to artists anyhow, but so I will actually join a little atelier basically in London, which will produce digital artworks, and it's the whole spectrum of mixed reality and augmented reality and all of this. And for me, I mean, on a personal note, it's a little bit to get back to where I once began when I escaped the academic world to be close to artists. And not to have 200 people. And I was, before I was here, was the director of the Venice Biennale, which is a complicated thing. And this will be different, and it's a challenge because we don't know what virtual reality and augmented reality and all of this will mean to art, but that's what we're there to explore.
Yeah, and this is basically the moment in which it's always fascinating to think how, first of all, the military come into a technology. And then the art world comes into a technology. I think in some ways we're trying to bring architecture in a bit quicker than it normally does because it's pretty slow. But you are totally right in the sense that actually what acute art is doing and what your position is going to be is essentially defining an entire new genre or typology in art, which essentially doesn't have much of a history
doesn't have much of a foundation. Maybe you disagree, but
I mean, we're not the only ones, but I mean, the only thing I've done so far, I'm still here a few more months, but I have created a little group of advisors, and that's not even official, but it's people who have been interested in this. And I was thinking about the Second Life and things that I had almost forgotten about. Fei, who's a Chinese artist, is one of these people, and a curator who's omnipresent, and you will say, oh, but Hans Ulrich Obrist is always interested in all new kind of curatorial approaches, so he's one of the group, and a real pioneer who's always, you know, interested in whatever is technologically new and challenging, and is Laurie Anderson, and she's also part of that group. And Laurie has always been interested in new things that other artists maybe find a little bit unattractive because they're technically kind of not so appealing. And you know, she was into CD-ROMs, and we have all forgotten CD. She showed me some big box of CD-ROM productions that no one can see, and she said, I don't know why I did this. No one will see it anymore. But there's something with her that, you know, reconciles everything. It's something with her poetic approach and her voice, and you know, even if VR is a little bit unappealing right now. Not this, but you know, I went to the Venice Film Festival, and the film world is a little bit further ahead, actually, it seems. I mean, there are sections in Sundance and in Venice, and there were 70 productions or something, but still there's a big threshold there to actually put on some big, you know, backpack with a computer and gloves and heavy headset, and then, you know, you also make fun of, I mean, you're watched all the time, but there were some pretty fantastic pieces there. Once you're in, you forget about that. Yeah. So phenomenologically, it's so strong that, you know, it doesn't matter, and that's what Laurie is quite convinced by. So we're not the only ones, of course.
No,
She's producing this with her own people, and there are some, you know, artworks already in VR, as you all know. But still, it's early years, I guess.
So. Let's just go through it rather like systematically, just because I'm primarily interested, and maybe this is a question that you can't answer, but what is the process of creating an artwork that's specifically designed for virtual reality, as you see it?
I mean, what we will try to be is a totally artist-centric platform, or atelier, or studio, or institution even. It's a small thing. There are 5 people who sit in 2 offices in the Somerset House in London, so it's not that impressive or huge or anything. But we will try to follow the artist's intuitions and visions. It's not what already is out there. You know, I know some of the big technology companies who will launch new devices with the help of the art and design. And some friends of mine are actually doing that. It's a little bit like advertisement, but it could be fun anyhow, good. But we are not that. And when, of course, people then will wonder maybe, oh, so why do they do this? Is this some sort of smart commercial thing? Not really. There isn't really a clear commercial model. One could think that maybe this will be something like Spotify or Netflix or something in the future, that one can, you know, look at artworks and you pay $4.99 and you can see wonderful things. Who knows? But I doubt. I mean, it will take many years until something like that. So the monetarization question is very open. Also, could it be that one sells editions? Who am I to moralize? Why not? I mean, if an artist, if we produce a piece and a young artist has no money and he or she could also do an edition of 7 and sell them through the gallery, okay. But that's not like what will kind of realize the full potential of VR, which is going to be, you know, omnipresent, that we can. It does it. However, it's a little bit like video art, you know. Yeah. If you remember Matthew Barney or Douglas Gordon or something, they sold editions, and so that could be, you know. But this is now we're talking immediately like art world specific things. So how is this going to work? But I'm basically more interested in it from a point of view of experimentation and experience, basically.
Okay, so if we reframe that question and think about some of the discussions that have been had here about this question of human perception, cognitive science, also let's say the point of entry, or the way that you physically experience a virtual environment. At the moment, as we see here in this exhibition, which is, if we compare, for example, this situation to an exhibition at Moderna that with Nathalie Djurberg and Hans Baer that was on recently, which also had a virtual reality artwork, it's the same device that's being used, which is practically out of date now. this technology is sort of accelerating so quickly. But there's,
Why say no?
well, because next year, next year,
better.
sensors are going. You know, this kind of it kind of shows also an interesting, let's say, transition between how one experiences. This is a relatively free-form thing. You pick up that headset, you put it on. There's a certain liberation in the space. In most artwork, VR artworks that I've seen, there's something a lot more protective about the environment. There's somebody sort of like handling you a little bit, or protecting you from the walls, or maybe you enter into a dark cube. I'm just kind of interested in the context of this to think about actually spatially, how do you wrap up a VR artwork?
It's a very good question. I mean, I say this not to be overly friendly or something, but I think this is a very good show. And I think it's very, very interesting because, there's so many limitations. There has been artworks at Art Basel and everywhere already, and they're normally quite boring. And, it's a little bit, in the corner, there are two headsets and one can be there. Some artists who I talk to, and of course I've already speak to a lot of artists about what they would envision, what they maybe would want to do. So many people say that they're a little bit not so interested in VR because it's so autistic, solipsistic, closed off that you're alone at home or something. Whereas art is about situations like this where you share ideas and experiences, and this show of course is that we're here in this physical space, but we can also have avatars or other people from who are somewhere else in the world, and it's very, very promising. I think that's why I liked the show immediately when you showed it to me, or you showed it to me. The Natalie Hellberg piece, they wanted it in there because it was almost a midlife retrospective. Almost everything they've done. They are very old-fashioned artists in a way. Natalie and Hans, who they're a couple in life, but also in art. He does the sound or the music, and she does the sculptural work. And that was a very low-tech production. They made everything by hand, and they wanted it in there, well, but also quite great as a kind of fairy tale-like thing. Yeah. I don't really know how this is going to enter the institution. Tate has already done a number of things, but it's more that they have produced VR versions of entire exhibitions, I think. Classical exhibitions like Modigliani or things like that. But I think this is one of the tasks that me and my colleagues and people in other places will have to kind of really work with. How are we going to show the works? Will they? I'm also a believer in the kind of critical intersubjective sharing of things. That's why I'm interested in art exhibitions and museums and institutions. And the idea that all of this will happen, when you're alone at home or something, is the last I would want. What do you think? How will it be? I mean, this is a good example, but what will art shows look like in, let's say, 4 years?
I don't know. I think personally, I think there's a larger dilemma, which is about the question of, if we think of virtual or multiple virtual worlds, or a persistently mapped virtual environment, we have something which is going to be quite hard to transpose from the physical to the virtual, which is this notion of like public space and public environments, and environments which don't necessarily, which aren't necessarily, let's say, controlled. And I think that's almost the way that an institution can actually translate between these environments. Because I mean, if we consider that we're living in this moment of liquid modernity, right? Like post-modernity, in a moment where essentially what we're starting to see is institutions of all different kinds, less so in Sweden as a nation actually more than other places in the world. Institutions are very strong here. But they are starting to collapse in different ways. And this question of the public is starting to reform around that. So if I were to answer that direct question, I would argue very simply that art will predominantly be experienced in large institutional physical environments that are determined as public space in virtual worlds. And in many ways that might seem like a rather conservative or traditional or sort of narrow-sighted point of view, but I actually think that there's something about the enclosure of a public environment and the safety that an institution kind of provides in this way that is the only way that we can actually have artworks presented in ways which are free and accessible and engageable on different levels.
Yeah. There's a comment or question here.
Yeah.
I think it probably depends on whether it's VR or extended reality, which is actually be in the city, because there can also be a major explosion of street art that is completely animated and bananas everywhere.
Yeah, but exactly. And to just clarify my point, maybe I'm talking about enclosure, and that doesn't necessarily have to have like an architectural manifestation. It doesn't have to be walls and a roof. But this question of almost an institutional public enclosure, which could be defined by something even more ephemeral. So this is
like a subscription.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Oh God.
The way I like to think about this transition is you have, it's almost like being told the concept of a tape recorder in the 18th century, and the only relation you have to music is experiencing music in this fantastic, orchestrate and beautiful environment. It's almost hard to fathom, like the step, like the revolution really that's happened post inventing the ability to record and replay music, and how that's like, I mean, even like Spotify would be hard to even comprehend. I think like that's why it's so exciting, Daniel, and like to follow the art world is maybe that's like the size of the transition that art is going to go through too. It's hard to even imagine. Like I sold my headset in 2014 to a visual sculpture artist, and he was the one who told this metaphor. He's like, basically, this is like the imaginal tape recorder for me. Like
it's funny with these comparisons, because I had a conversation with someone who was much more convinced that this was important some years ago than I was myself, because I knew very little about it. Who's the best-selling super duper author Douglas Copeland, who used to work for Wired. So he's not a big techno person actually, Douglas, but he's but he knows how to, he can pretend, because he used to be an editor there, and he can write small things, and he can really speak that language. And he said, I remember I can't remember if he said it or I think I asked, so what is this like? Is it going to be like the introduction of television or more like electricity? And he said, electricity. This will totally change everything. It's like the medium that will, you also had a very aggressive kind of rhetoric around it. It's the medium that will destroy all other mediums, and or eat everything else.
Yeah, and I'm all for like aggressive rhetorics, and I'm all for like aggressive statements about how things will change. But like I do kind of the way that I perceive it, that a transition needs to take place, and that transition is some kind of mixed blending between what we understand or what we recognize and what we can't possibly understand. And I think that's something that I've also learned from conversations with Lara, Fredrik, and you, William, in many ways, is that when you really look at how people who are engaging with virtual environments, it's like, as this exhibition somehow demonstrates, the most referential things often create the most immersive responses, because there's some connection.
I'm very interested in that street art remark, because one artist who I spoke to said that some people say they don't like VR at all because it's too kind of masturbatory or something, or kind of solipsistic, or whereas AR or mix is something very interesting. And then one of the technicians I spoke to said that's like saying, I really am not interested in birds, but I love eagles or something. Because it's the same thing. It's like up to you if you want to project it in a closed space or in here or something. But I mean, there is an artist who proposed something almost like some sort of surreal version of Pokemon Go or something, with just absurd things that would happen everywhere. Wherever you go in the street, there will be, massive things coming. And that has that started yet? Are there projects with that?
And the only real thing I know that isn't proper with a headset was Snapchat did something with Jeff Koons in Central Park.
Yeah.
And then New York Studio, basically the same day, did a tagged version of that post sculpture in that park, which isn't that amazing, either of those, but as a concept, it seems like all of this could be.
But then it's just you do it with the phone, basically.
Yeah. But I mean, everything that's happening on the phone platforms is just training a lot of developers to do it elsewhere.
So I guess it's when the magic leap-like kind of glasses become mainstream that things like this will be more possible.
For sure.
Wouldn't the equivalent be hacking those systems? The equivalent of street art.
Could be. Or it could be one of the ways anyway.
It's a question.
I was actually thinking when you were speaking about how is that an art and how that would relate to an art. And to me, art is always about translating the feeling of the artist into this world. And and like I'm like a light designer, and before I'm like an interior architect, and I think like worldwide design is going into like experience design more than like even like hotels, like Scandic Camper, for example. They give you the story about the space, and it feels like more and more like the artists want to give you the feeling of the like make you come into the feeling, and then you explore yourself. I was working on VR when speaking about light, because it's actually very hard to say like I want soft lighting, and then what soft lighting means, and then it's very easy to like have it like and say, oh, that's how I feel about the space, and then show it to somebody else, and then like come to like a common ground of feeling to space, to experiences, and this kind of experience actually will bring people together more, I think. So I liked when you said like it will be more of a designing the tool than designing what you are expected to do inside it.
I think you're coming to maybe the point that all space becomes narrative.
Yeah.
All space becomes, or its only purpose is to be meaningful in some way, right? Or be narrative in some sense.
But that goes even beyond space, I would say, for VR, because I think that is the real thing is going to be that every person lives a living narrative, and all the new ways of having communication can be from your pet hummingbird or your virtual robot dog or whatever. That can be the way you receive a text message in the future that's going to just stand up and bark at you. And like, I mean, it's going to be freaking bananas, and it's not going to be the same for everyone. And sometimes you're going to like, you can have yours programmed so it looks like it's fighting every other pet, but the other person doesn't see that because that's not in his or her narrative. And so it's, I don't believe much in like these sort of boxed-in systems. I think this is going to be bananas for everyone who wants it to be, and it's going to be super square for everyone who wants it.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, my question then is that yes, it can be bananas, but like listening to Thor talking about Second Life and how actually that got into trouble because there were like some illicit like actions in that platform, and like you talking about Sebastian Errázuriz in New York doing the tagging of the Jeff Koons. And seeing net neutrality here, it makes me wonder that yes, it can be bananas, but actually it's going to be, it feels that it's going to be automatically commodified by a system that is beyond that kind of like individual freedom, quote unquote, right? So I wonder
filters for each other.
But like the recent history of how the digital world has been working for all of us doesn't really tell us that there are going to be filters of that. Actually tell us that the platforms are going to be homogenizing certain practices and commodifying all those practices, making all these elements that are very bananas at the beginning to make them automatically homogeneous and automatically economically driven. Right, so I wonder in all these questions that I really see all this capacity. I really see all this capacity of this as an amazing tool. But I'm constantly putting my brain in a mode that says, yeah, but what is going to happen? Who is going to come and take that space for us, right? So I wonder what is the possibility of that space to be really a space of reaction, a space in which like certain dissonances can be operative, because that is exactly what James you were saying. Yeah. Like the spaces in which we are all operating, they have layers of laws and statuses and definitions and arrangements and agreements that we have been doing for a long time. So I wonder who's doing that for virtual, right?
And in fact, if you do spend time in the next generation Second Life, which is in fact what's running from this exact same company, most of the time is actually spent on talking about behavior and morals and behavioral codes rather than the technology itself. Constantly people are debating how do we treat people who are behaving badly, or what is a new kind of behavioral code at all. And in fact, one can witness things like what happened just a few weeks ago at one of these meetings where one visitor was misbehaving or just being a bit rude, and he vanished. He was warned by the developer, this is the last warning, and then 5 seconds later he disappeared, as in he was locked away from that space. This is going to become an enormous kind of debate, and no one really knows how to do it. There's been talks from Philip Rosedale about slowing down the bandwidth of people that behave slowly so that your avatar is glitching. Basically kind of it's visible on your avatar if you behave badly in the past. So all of these status things and the way that we represent ourselves in our environments are also going to become codified in a completely new way.
The same with the comments in Facebook. I mean, I think we can, of course, punish and reframe it. If it exists, it exists. If people want to do violent, they will find a way how to do it. It's more about to identify it and explore it and try to discuss it before we really, because it's a fact that people want to be haters sometimes in the comments or in virtual, like WeChat, for example, VR chat. But we can, of course, avoid this. But this is probably expression of human nature, which we should start to avoid, but try to start to understand. That's where VR should be very behavioral and very social and very explorative before we start to build products, services, and commercial platforms. That's why we have all the artists, researchers, scientists, like creators today to discuss this. That's a point.
Well, we can all be supervised by AI and just fall into a pocket when everyone else is great at the same
Love
as
your
you, and then you are all of a sudden into like a psychological program to be trained back to be.
Maybe there's when I mentioned this,
a million different trap doors.
When I mentioned this semi-science, there's also this philosophical theory which is called like a simulated world. That what if this is VR? It's someone's game, like God's game, and what if we're all like heroes of someone's game? But yeah, what if? And that's about to think about different things and answer questions, because we raise enough questions today to try to find answers on them and think today. Yeah. So
I wanted to ask Daniel, or maybe you wanted to follow up on this, about your thoughts on, because at the moment and for the foreseeable future, the gate into something virtual is very obvious. You put something on your face, or you're at least aware that you have something over your eyes. And of course, in the art world, the way you approach an artwork is very important, and the way that institutions and curation is all about that, really. And if you have a room before you reach the artwork, or if you put an artwork in a public space, then where do you put it? So how do you think, or what's your thoughts about the way you actually meet these
These are,
virtual worlds?
almost practical answers now, but I really wonder. And so I talked to Pierre Wig, who think it's very interesting to kind of to add augmented reality. He already did actually in Münster some small things that weren't so visible to most people, but he's an philosophically very sophisticated artist interested in different layers of ontology, and the virtual ingredient will be there, and he would be not interested in that in a kind of closed off space where you are alone or you can only meet avatars in it. Whereas Laurie Anderson, she's only interested in escapism. She wants the full-blown, it's like reading a book, reading Borges. You're alone, but you're not alone. You're somewhere else. So she thinks that the interesting way, and that's what she's done. There's a piece right now at the Louisiana in Denmark. You enter a space that she, in a very old-fashioned way, has actually painted, or she has produced, and you're in it, and then you enter the virtual. You have to put on some glasses. Maybe in the future they will be a little smaller, but still, you will be, and then seamlessly, or almost, it feels like then you're in her world, and it starts somehow. But yeah, I really don't know. We'll see. But it's interesting also. I mean, when you said theater is as close as we get, when you compare to those short time windows of experimentation when film was introduced and Hans Richter, Viking Egeling, and people did like very strange things, or the video camera is introduced and Bruce Nauman turns it around, and maybe we're in that moment right now, and in 2 years that dystopia that was mentioned will fully, the disciplinary society in the virtual version will take over everything.
But the point of discussing these things now, in a way, is to try and understand what kind of value systems should exist and how they would be implemented. I think it's the simple. Just as a very interesting side note, in Sansa, which if you have Windows, you can just download it and you can come into this exhibition anytime. there's also an exhibition at the Smithsonian, right, which is at the Renwick Gallery, which is this smaller building nearby. I mean, it's still enormous. In which there was the first exhibition about art at Burning Man took place last year, which in itself was kind of a strange thing because the art of Burning Man is designed to be burnt and it's designed to have this temporality, but there was a decision made that for the first time it would be brought into an exhibition environment, marble floors, archways, grand staircases, very strange thing. Then they collaborated with Sansar as we have to create a virtual version of the exhibition, and I went round it and it was, okay, here we are, here's a wonderfully tall sculpture, you look up at it, you think this is fantastic, and then as you navigate the rooms, you eventually come to a white glowing portal. You walk through the white glowing portal and you're in the middle of Black Rock City with these artworks around, and it's a very, very simple gesture. It's a very simple experiential gesture, but to me it starts to represent what, it's small steps towards something that was actually an incredibly mind-blowing experience. This kind of juxtaposition of environments in which the objects, the artwork, existed in both worlds. And I feel like, as far as I can see, that's possibly the only or the most advanced sort of attempt to create an architecturally or a spatially constructed experience of an exhibition, which goes beyond just simply having you walk around a series of rooms and look at a series of artworks. I think we're going to have to somehow sort of just bring this to a close. I mean, it's incredibly interesting. I mean, we're going to be around for, I think the museum's open for another half an hour. We're going to be around, there's bits and pieces happening outside. I think everybody who's been speaking tonight can stick around, I hope, for a half an hour, and hopefully we can have some more of these conversations. On the 17th, this exhibition closes on the 18th of November. On the 17th, we're going to actually be having an event here with Mark Wigley, who's the former Dean of Columbia's Graduate School of Architecture, Preservation and Planning, an extremely interesting intellectual talking about precisely some of the topics which have come up here, which is the idea of fiction and storytelling and narrative in architecture, particularly in relation to virtual worlds. So watch out, there'll be more information about this coming soon, but I hope you can be part of that too. Thank you very much.
If I may just add one thing that we forgot to mention, and of course this event is presented by us, ArkDes, and all the guests, but also the Architectural Association in London, an architecture school, and there is a group of 12 students. They're all in this room that are here for the whole week, and they are exploring these sort of ideas in their projects. And this week, tomorrow afternoon and on Thursday afternoon, they will be exhibiting their projects in VR around the outside of Boxen. So if you have time, please come back tomorrow afternoon and on Thursday afternoon to see that.
Lots of VR experiences.